He walked out on a Tuesday. No note, no call, no reason. Just gone. The kind of gone that doesn't leave a door open, doesn't leave a crack in the curtain for you to peer through and wonder. Just absence, absolute and indifferent, like a tooth pulled clean from the root. Rowan Vale had spent 8 years learning to stop probing that empty socket with her tongue. She had almost managed it. Almost. If the person who destroyed your life showed up bleeding on your table, would you save them? Or would your hands hesitate, just for one terrible second? Drop a comment below with your city and tell me, because that question is about to tear one woman's entire world in half. And if stories that get under your skin and refuse to let go are your thing, hit that like button and subscribe right now. Because what happens next in Rowan Vale's life is the kind of thing that changes a person permanently. Don't miss a single chapter. The ambulance bay doors burst open at 6:47 in the morning. Rowan heard them before she saw them. The hard slap of rubber wheels on linoleum, the controlled urgency in the paramedic's voice cutting through the noise of a busy ER that had already been running hot since 4 a.m. She was at the nurse's station rewriting a medication order that the attending had scrawled illegibly, her third cup of bad coffee cooling at her elbow, her hair pulled back so tight it gave her a mild headache she'd stopped noticing 2 hours ago. 34-year-old male, MVA, blunt head trauma, GCS-12 on scene, BP 110 over 70, and dropping. Bay 4, Rowan said, not looking up. She finished the last digit on the order, capped her pen, and pushed off the counter. She was already moving before the gurney cleared the second set of doors. That was the thing about 8 years of emergency nursing that nobody who hadn't done it could fully understand. The body learns the job before the mind catches up. Her hands were already reaching for gloves. Her eyes were already scanning the patient for the visible injuries. The head wound, the blood dried dark at the temple, the way his left arm sat at a wrong angle that said probable fracture. Before her brain had fully registered the face, and then her brain registered the face, her hands stopped moving. Not for long. A fraction of a second. The kind of pause that nobody in that bay would notice, because everyone else was doing their job and the world was moving fast and loud around her. But Rowan felt it the way you feel a stare that isn't there. That sudden, stomach-dropping absence of solid ground. Cade Mercer. She recognized him the way you recognize something you've tried for years to forget. Not gradually, not with uncertainty, but all at once, like a fist opening inside your chest. He was older. Of course he was older. 8 years had sharpened his jaw and put new lines at the corners of his eyes, and there was something different in the set of his shoulders, even unconscious on a gurney, something that said money and control, said a man who had remade himself and grown comfortable in the new version. His coat was expensive. She registered that stupidly, peripherally. His coat was expensive and his face was bleeding and he was alive and he was right here in Bay 4 of Foothills Medical Center, Calgary, Alberta, and she was the nurse on duty. Vale, Dr. Pham's voice sharp. Here, she snapped back in. Gloves on. What are we looking at? The paramedic rattled off the rest of the handoff while Rowan positioned herself at the head of the bed and began her assessment with hands that were, she was dimly furious to notice, completely steady. Pupils equal and reactive. Airway intact. The laceration above his left eyebrow was deep. She could see that clearly. But the bleeding was controllable, and the real concern was the head trauma, the question of what was happening beneath the bone. Get me a CT order and call neuro, she said. Already paged, someone answered. Good. She worked. She was very good at working. The first 20 minutes were all motion and decision-making, which was a mercy. When the emergency is acute, there is no room for anything else. No history, no feeling, no 8 years of silence pressing at the back of your throat. Just the patient, the vitals, the wound, the procedure. The laceration needed irrigation and closure. Rowan did it herself. She had done this exact thing, cleaned and closed a wound above an eyebrow. 4 times already this week on strangers. She had done it hundreds of times. Her hands knew the motion in the dark, but her hands had never done it to this particular face. She worked with her jaw set and her breathing controlled, and she did not let her eyes move to the line of his cheekbone or the way his eyelashes looked in the fluorescent light, both of which were exactly as she remembered and also somehow completely different, which was a thing she refused to spend any time thinking about while she had a needle in her hand. He was semi-conscious through most of it. drifting in and out, answering questions with the slow, thickened responses of a concussed man. His name, yes, the year, mostly, the pain level, a grunt that could mean anything. The CT was ordered. Someone wheeled him out. Rowan stepped back, stripped her gloves, and stood very still for approximately 4 seconds. Then she walked to the supply room, closed the door behind her, and leaned against the shelving. The room smelled like antiseptic and cardboard. A mop bucket sat in the corner. Somewhere outside the door, the ER continued its relentless rhythm. Call bells, rolling wheels, a child crying 2 bays over, someone's monitor alarming and then going quiet. She pressed her palms flat against her thighs and breathed. 8 years. She thought about Ember this morning, still asleep when Rowan left, her dark hair spread across the pillow, and her mouth slightly open the way it always was, one arm hanging off the side of the bed because Ember slept like she'd been dropped from a moderate height. 7 years old and already too long for her bed, already obsessed with rubber bands and cardboard and elaborate mechanical systems that didn't quite work but were always impressively complicated. Already. And this was the part that Rowan lived with every day, quietly, without complaint, starting to ask questions. Mom, did I have a dad? Where is he? Does he know about me? She had answered those questions as carefully and as honestly as she could without telling the whole truth, because Ember was 7 and the whole truth had edges, and Rowan had been waiting for what exactly she couldn't always articulate. For the right moment, for Ember to be older, for some version of herself that felt ready. She pushed off the shelving, ran cold water over her wrists at the utility sink, and went back to work. I was awake by 9:30. The CT had come back with no bleed, which was good news. A moderate concussion, the laceration, the fractured radius in his left arm, now set and splinted. He'd been moved to a monitored bed in the observation area, which still technically fell under her section, which was the universe being gratuitously unkind. Rowan stood outside the curtain for a moment. She had taken care of people she disliked before. She had taken care of people who had done genuinely terrible things. The drunk driver, the domestic abuser who'd come in on the wrong end of someone's retaliation, the man last year who'd tried to tell her how to do her job while she was actively saving his life. She was professional. She was good at professional. This was different, and she knew it was different, and she walked through the curtain anyway. He turned his head when he heard her. His eyes found her face, and she watched the exact moment recognition hit him. Watched it move through him like a current, watched his expression do something complicated and then go very still. Neither of them spoke for a moment. Rowan, he said finally. His voice was the same. That was the thing she hadn't prepared for. That his voice would be the same, a little rough and low, the kind of voice that carried in a quiet room. She had prepared, in the 30 seconds outside the curtain, for him to look like a stranger. He did not look like a stranger. Mr. Mercer, she kept her voice even, clipboard in hand. How's the pain level? Something moved across his face. You're my nurse. I am. She looked at the chart. On a scale of 1 to 10. Rowan, the pain, Mr. Mercer. A silence. Then, 5, 6, maybe. She made the note. She checked the IV line, checked the dressing on his arm, did everything that needed doing with the same efficiency she brought to every patient, and she was almost done, almost clear, when he said, I looked for you. Her pen stopped. I came back, he said, 2 years after I left. I tried every number I had. I went to the apartment. There was someone else living there. I tried your old workplace. I moved. Her voice came out flat. People do that. I know. He didn't look away from her face. Even concussed, even with a split eyebrow and an arm in a splint, he had that quality she remembered. That particular stillness, like a man who had decided something and could wait for the rest of the world to catch up. I know people do that. I needed you to know I tried. Rowan finished her notes, capped her pen, looked at him directly for the first time since she'd walked through the curtain, which she immediately understood had been a mistake, because looking at him directly was a different thing than the controlled peripheral awareness she'd been managing, and her chest did something she hadn't given it permission to do. I have other patients, she said. I know. He exhaled. I'm not asking for anything. He stopped, started again. Can I ask you one thing? She didn't answer. She also didn't leave. He took that as the consent it was. Are you okay? In general, not right now, in your life. She stared at him. Of all the things she had imagined Cade Mercer saying to her if she ever saw him again, and she had imagined it, in the first year especially, in the particular way you rehearse conversations with people who have hurt you, running the scenarios at 2 a.m., until you know every version of the argument, she had not imagined that. I'm fine, she said. Good. He nodded, just slightly, like he needed to hear it. Good. I'm glad. She left. She pulled the curtain closed behind her and she stood in the hallway and she thought, I have a 7-year-old daughter and you don't know she exists, and I don't know what to do with that information today. She thought it for approximately 3 seconds. Then she went to check on the post-appendectomy in Bay 2 and the asthmatic in Bay 6 because the ER did not pause for the convenient processing of personal crises. By noon, she had managed 11 patients, one code that resolved well, one that didn't, and Cade Mercer had been given his discharge paperwork, and she had arranged, with deliberate calculation, to have her colleague Dara handle the exit assessment. She was not running away. She was triaging. That distinction mattered. She sat in the break room at 12:40 eating half a sandwich she didn't taste, her phone face down on the table in front of her, and she thought about Ember's question from last week. The most recent version, the most direct yet, delivered with the calm logic of a child who had been thinking it through. If my dad didn't know about me, is that why he left? Because he didn't know I was coming? Rowan had held that question in her hands like something fragile and sat with it, and then said, as carefully as she could, I think it's complicated, Bug. I think sometimes things happen between grown-ups that are hard to explain. That's not really an answer, Mom. I know. She picked up her sandwich, put it down. Through the break room window, she could see the hallway, the organized chaos of a Thursday in a level 1 trauma center. She could see Dara at the nurse's station, which meant Dara had come back from wherever, which meant Cade Mercer had probably been discharged already and was gone, and she could stop feeling like the walls of the room had moved 3 inches closer together. Her phone buzzed. Her mother's number. She let it go to voicemail. Her mother had been saying for 2 years that Ember needed more information, that children were resilient, that honesty served them better than protection, that Rowan was holding on to this secret not for Ember's sake, but for her own. And there were moments at 2 a.m., with the house quiet around her, when Rowan thought her mother might not be entirely wrong, and those moments made her furious in a way she couldn't fully account for. She finished the sandwich. She went back to work. She almost made it through the rest of the shift without incident. Almost. At 4:15, with 45 minutes left in her 12-hour day, she came around the corner near the elevator bank and stopped. Cade was standing there. He had not been discharged. Or he had been discharged and he'd come back. Either way, he was standing near the elevator in his expensive coat with his arm in its splint and a prescription in his good hand, and he was looking at her with an expression she couldn't categorize, and everything in her went very, very quiet. You're supposed to rest, she said. I know. He didn't move. I had them call me a car. It's downstairs. He looked at the prescription in his hand. Back at her. I know I don't have the right to ask you for anything. I understand that completely. But I need to say one thing, and then I'll go, and if you never want to see me again, I'll respect that. The hallway was not empty. 2 nurses passed them with a supply cart. A family was waiting near the elevator doors. This was not the right place for whatever this was. Cade. His name in her mouth felt like something she'd accidentally bitten down on. This is where I work. I know. I'm sorry. 1 minute, please. She looked at him. She looked at the elevator. She looked back at him. 2 minutes, she said. Not here. She stopped herself before she said family room, because the family room was where she took people to tell them someone had died, and she was not doing that. Side door, past radiology. There's a little courtyard. He nodded. They walked through the hospital without speaking, which was its own kind of surreal. Cade Mercer moving through Foothills Medical Center. Like a man who was trying very hard not to limp, and mostly succeeding, Rowan walking beside him in her scrubs like she did this every day. Like this was perfectly ordinary, like her heart rate was at its usual resting 62. The courtyard was cold. March in Calgary was still mostly winter, a sky the color of old pewter. The bare trees at the edge of the space looking skeletal and patient, a concrete bench that nobody sat on until May. She didn't sit. He didn't either. Talk, she said. He did. She listened. She stood with her arms crossed, not against him, but against the cold. And she listened to Cade Mercer explain 8 years of silence in 2 minutes, and some part of her had expected, had maybe even wanted, the explanation to be inadequate, to be something she could dismiss cleanly. His father's financial empire. The criminal investigation that had taken down 3 companies and put 2 men in federal custody. The morning he had looked at everyone he loved and understood, with a clarity he called the worst certainty of his life, that staying near them was the most dangerous thing he could do. I left because I thought it was the only way to keep you safe, he said. I know how that sounds. I know it sounds like an excuse. It does sound like an excuse, she said. Her voice was steady. People have hard things happen to them, Cade. They still make phone calls. I know. He didn't argue it. That surprised her. I'm not telling you it was right. I'm telling you it was what I did and why I did it, and I've had 8 years to understand the difference between those two things. The cold settled around them. Somewhere above the hospital, a plane crossed the gray sky. She could hear the muffled noise of the ER from here. It was never fully quiet, never fully distant. She said, "There's something I need to tell you." He went still. She looked at him. She had thought about this moment. Not this specific moment, not this specific cold courtyard with its empty bench and its bare trees, but the moment of telling him, more times than she could count. And every version of it in her head had felt either too large or too small, too angry or too resigned. In her head, she had yelled at him. She had been ice cold and surgical. She had cried once, in a version at 3 a.m. that she preferred to forget. Standing here in front of him, looking at his face, she felt none of those things. She felt oddly only tired. And underneath the tired, something that might have been relief. "I was pregnant when you left," she said. "I didn't know yet. I found out 6 weeks later." The color left his face. "Her name is Ember," Rowan said. "She's 7 years old. She is smart and stubborn, and she has your eyes. And she has been asking me about her father for the past 2 years, and I have not known what to tell her, because I did not know where you were or who you'd become, and now you're standing in my hospital with your arm in a splint, and I don't—" Her voice, to her private fury, thinned slightly on the last words. She steadied it. "I don't know what the right thing is here. I'm telling you the truth because she deserves that. Because she's going to keep asking, and she deserves better than silence." Cade Mercer was very still. He didn't speak for a long moment. The kind of silence that has weight to it, that you can feel pressing against the skin. When he finally said something, it wasn't what she expected. "Does she like—" He stopped, tried again. His voice had something broken in it that he wasn't bothering to conceal. "Does she like anything specific? Does she have, I don't know, interests, things she cares about?" Rowan stared at him. "Rubber bands and cardboard," she said after a moment. "She's building some kind of elaborate trap. She's been working on it for 3 weeks." Something moved across his face that she couldn't name. Not quite a smile. Something more fundamental than that. "Okay," he said, very quiet. "Okay." She didn't know what it meant. She wasn't sure he did either. The wind came through the courtyard and she pulled her arms tighter against herself, and Cade Mercer stood there in his expensive coat with his broken arm and his destroyed expression, and neither of them said anything for a while because some things don't have words that fit them properly, and the ones that do don't arrive on time. "I need to finish my shift," she said finally. "I know." He didn't try to stop her. She turned back toward the side door, stopped, didn't turn around. "I'll need a number," she said. If there's going to be any kind of conversation, I'll need a way to reach you." A pause. Then the sound of him moving, the soft tear of paper. His prescription, she realized. He was writing on the back of his prescription. And then he said, "I'm putting it on the bench." She nodded, once to herself. Then she went back inside. Behind her, the bare trees stood very still against the gray March sky, patient as they always were, waiting for a season that was still a long way off, but was, on some cellular level, already in motion. She did not look into the paper until her shift ended. She sat in her car in the parking structure for 4 minutes in the dark and quiet, the paper folded in her hand, And she thought about Ember asleep in her bed this morning, with her arm hanging off the edge. And she thought about the question Ember had asked last week. And she thought about the look on Cade Mercer's face when she'd said her name is Ember, that particular expression of a man who has just understood the true size of something he lost without knowing he'd lost it. She thought, I don't know if I can do this. She thought, she's going to keep asking. She unfolded the paper, read the number, folded it again. She started this car, pulled out of the parking structure, and drove through Calgary's frozen evening streets toward home, toward a 7-year-old with dark hair and rubber bands and questions that deserved better answers than silence. Outside the windows, the city moved past in its ordinary way, lights and traffic and people going home from their days, and none of it knew or cared that something had just shifted, quietly and irrevocably, in the life of one woman in a gray sedan who was trying to figure out what courage looked like when it came with no guarantee of outcome. She drove. The number stayed folded in her pocket. The number stayed in her jacket pocket for 4 days. Not because she forgot it was there. She was aware of it the way you are aware of a stone in your shoe. Not always at the front of your mind, but never fully absent either. That small, persistent pressure shifting with every step. She transferred it from the jacket to her scrubs to the small dish on her kitchen counter where she kept her keys and spare change. And then on the 3rd day she moved it to the drawer beside her bed, which was either progress or avoidance, and she genuinely couldn't tell the difference. Ember noticed the dish was cleaner than usual. You move stuff, Ember said, standing at the kitchen counter Wednesday morning in her socks, eating cereal with the focused intensity she brought to most physical tasks. The dish by the keys. There was a piece of paper there. I tidied up. Ember looked at her with those dark eyes that saw too much. You never tidy the dish. You always say that's where things go to be found. People change. In 4 days? Rowan poured coffee and said nothing, which Ember, to her credit, recognized as a closed door and didn't push against. This was one of the things Rowan loved fiercely about her daughter. Ember understood instinctively that some silences weren't invitations. She pushed back against rules, against bedtimes, against the specific injustice of vegetables, but she had never in 7 years pushed against her mother's silences. As if she understood, on some wordless level, that those silences were load-bearing. She left for school. Rowan stood in the kitchen and drank her coffee and looked at the drawer beside her bed from across the apartment, through 2 open doorways, as if she could see through walls. Then she went to work. The ER on a Wednesday in March was its own particular flavor of difficult. 2 car accidents before 8 a.m., a diabetic crisis in a man who'd been managing his condition alone for 40 years and had finally made one miscalculation, and a woman in her late 60s who had been brought in by her daughter for chest pain that turned out to be severe anxiety. Manifesting as a cardiac event, her husband of 41 years had filed for divorce the previous Friday, and her body had simply decided it couldn't process that information through normal channels. Rowan sat with her for 20 minutes after the tests came back clean. Not a full conversation, she didn't have time for a full conversation, but 20 minutes because the woman, whose name was Gloria, had looked at her with such naked bewilderment, such genuine incomprehension that the world could produce this specific kind of cruelty, that leaving felt wrong. 41 years, Gloria said. I don't even know who I am without him. Rowan squeezed her hand. You'll figure that out, she said, and meant it as comfort, though she recognized that it wasn't, quite. Driving home that evening, she thought about Gloria, and then she thought about the paper in the drawer, and then she thought about how it was possible to go 41 years loving someone and still not know them completely. And she pulled into the parking lot of a grocery store she hadn't planned to stop at, and sat in the car for a while doing nothing at all. Her phone buzzed. Her colleague, Dara. Did the patient from Bay 4 come back? Rowan stared at the message. Why? He called the unit. Asked for you. Not in a weird way. He left his name and said just to tell you he called. Front desk gave me the message. She turned her phone over on her thigh. He had called the unit. He hadn't gone around her to reach Ember, hadn't hired a lawyer, hadn't done any of the aggressive things that fear had quietly offered as possibilities in the nights since she'd told him. He had called the nurse's unit, left his name, and said to tell her. She didn't know what to do with a man who did things correctly. She went inside and bought milk and pasta and a head of broccoli that Ember would negotiate strenuously against. And she drove home, and after Ember was asleep that night, she sat on the edge of her bed and opened the drawer and unfolded the paper and dialed the number. He picked up on the second ring. "It's Rowan," she said, because she didn't know how else to start. "I know." A pause. "Thank you for calling. You called the unit." "I did. I wasn't sure if you'd deleted the number." She hadn't deleted it. She also wasn't going to say that. "I got the message." "Yeah." Another pause, this one with texture to it, like he was deciding something. "I've been trying to figure out what the right thing to ask is. I don't want to push you. I also don't want to sit here doing nothing when there's a—" He stopped. "A daughter," she said flatly. "You can say it." "When there's a daughter I didn't know existed." His voice was very controlled. She recognized the control. It was the same kind she used at work, the kind you build deliberately to keep the real feeling from contaminating the task. "I'm not going to demand anything, Rowan. I want to be clear about that. Whatever happens, it happens on your terms. But I'd like to know her, if there's ever a way. If she ever—" He stopped again. "I don't know what the right word is." "She's already asked about you," Rowan said. Silence. "Not you specifically," she added. "About her father, where he is, why he left." "What did you tell her?" "That things between adults are complicated." "That's—" She heard him exhale. "That's not wrong." "It's not enough either. She's 7, not 4. She thinks about things." Rowan looked at the ceiling. "She's been building a mechanical trap for a month using rubber bands and cardboard. Last week she explained to me why her design had a fundamental flaw in the tension distribution. She used those words, tension distribution." A very long pause. Then, quietly, "She sounds like someone I'd be terrified to disappoint." That was so precisely accurate that it briefly disarmed her. "She is," Rowan said. "Then I don't want to be introduced to her as a possibility," he said. "If I'm going to be in her life, I want to actually be in her life. I know that's a lot to say right now. I know I haven't earned the right to say it. But I'd rather you know what I'm asking for than think I want something halfway." She had expected negotiations, scheduling, careful, lawyerly language about access and arrangements. She had not expected him to say, simply and directly, that he wanted to show up fully or not at all. "I need time," she said. "You can have it." "More than a week." "I know. And I need to talk to my mother." She wasn't sure why she added that, but it felt true. "She's going to have opinions." "I'd expect that." "She's going to want to meet you." A pause. Yeah. Okay. Whatever she needs." Rowan looked at the folded paper on her knee. "I'm not making any promises, Cade." "I know. And if at any point she seems distressed, then it stops, without argument. I understand." She sat with that for a moment. Outside the bedroom window, Calgary was dark and cold and very quiet, just the occasional sound of a car moving through the wet street, the distant mechanical sound of the city, settling into night. "I'll call you," she said. "Okay." She hung up, refolded the paper, held it in both hands for a moment the way you hold something you're not sure is fragile or isn't, and then she set it on the nightstand instead of the drawer, which felt, in a way she couldn't fully explain, like a different decision entirely. Her mother called the next morning at 7:15, which was either intuition or coincidence, and with her mother, the line between those two things had always been indistinct. "You look tired," her mother said, which was how she answered video calls. "I'm always tired. I work in an ER. Different tired." Her mother, Sylvia Vale, was 63 years old and had the particular directness of a woman who had raised a daughter alone and seen what evasion costs. She peered at the screen with the focused displeasure of someone who had already formed a conclusion. Something happened. Rowan poured coffee, made a calculation, put the coffee down. "Cade Mercer came into my ER on Monday," she said. "Car accident, head wound." The silence that followed was the kind that her mother produced when she was processing something important and refusing to react until she had. It lasted about 5 seconds, which was a long silence for a video call. "He came into your ER," Sylvia repeated. "He didn't plan it." "How do you know?" "Because he had a fractured arm and a concussion, Mom. People have done more elaborate things." A pause. "Did you talk to him?" "Yes." "And?" Rowan picked up the coffee. "I told him about Ember." Another silence. This one longer. Her mother reached off screen and Rowan heard the sound of a chair being pulled out, of Sylvia sitting down, of the particular careful silence of someone reorganizing everything they thought they knew about the present situation. "How did he take it?" Sylvia said. Not a question, a measurement. He went very still. He asked what she liked. What she liked. Her interests, what she cares about. Rowan looked at the counter. "I told him about the trap." Sylvia was quiet for a moment. "Did he try to argue? To push for access? Did he threaten anything?" "No." "Did he cry?" "No." This was the sound her mother made when she was revising an assumption and was not entirely pleased about it. "You've spoken to him since?" "Last night. On the phone." "Rowan." "I know." "You called him." "He called the unit first. He left his name and said to pass on the message. He didn't come back to the ER, didn't try to find my address, didn't—" She stopped. "He did everything right, Mom." "People who hurt us very badly can be very good at doing things right afterward," Sylvia said. "That's not a criticism of him. It's just true." "I know it's true." "So what do you want to do?" The question sat there, simple and enormous. "I want to do what's right for Ember," Rowan said. "I don't know if that includes him or not. I don't know yet." "Does she still ask?" "Every few weeks, less frantic than before, but more specific. The questions are getting more specific." Sylvia nodded slowly. "Then you already know what she needs. The question is whether he's safe to give it to her." "That's what I'm trying to figure out." "Then figure it out carefully and quickly," Sylvia said. "Because every month you wait, she's building a picture of that absence in her own head. And the picture she builds is going to be harder to correct than the truth." Rowan said nothing. "I want to meet him," Sylvia said, "before anything involves Ember, if you're going to consider this." "I know, I told him." Her mother's eyebrows rose. "You told him I'd want to meet him?" "He said whatever you need." Sylvia looked at her daughter through the screen for a long moment. "He said whatever you need." "Yes." She said again, in a slightly different register. She reached for something off screen. Rowan heard a coffee cup being set down. "Fine, set something up. I'll drive in from Red Deer." "You don't have to. Ember is my granddaughter, and you are my daughter, and that man walked out without warning and was absent for 8 years. I absolutely have to." She said it with complete calm, the way she said everything, which was somehow more final than anger would have been. "Set it up. I'll come in on a Saturday." Rowan told herself she'd wait 2 weeks before making any decisions. 2 weeks to observe, to think clearly, to not make choices from the altitude of adrenaline and shock. She made it 11 days. On day 11, Ember came home from school with a sealed note from her teacher, Mrs. Chandra, requesting a parent meeting at Rowan's earliest convenience. The note was careful and warm in the way that teacher notes about difficult things always were. Ember had been distracted in class. Ember had written something in her free writing journal that Mrs. Chandra thought was worth discussing. She had included a photocopy. Rowan stood in the hallway of the apartment, coat still on, and read Ember's handwriting, large and uneven and very deliberate, in the way of a child who is trying to make something exact. "My dad doesn't know I exist. My mom says things are complicated. I think complicated means it hurts someone. I think I will know what to do when I meet him. I am not scared. I just want to know if he would have stayed if he knew about me. That's my main question. I think about it a lot. I made up a science project to stop thinking about it, but I still think about it." Rowan sat down on the floor of the hallway, still in her coat, and read it 3 more times. She was not going to cry in the hallway. She was a woman who cried in the car, specifically or occasionally in the shower, which were both private and acceptable locations for crying, and the hallway was neither. She did not cry. She folded the note very carefully and put it in her coat pocket. Then she went to the kitchen and started dinner with hands that felt strange and slightly separate from her body, the way hands do when the mind is very far away. And when Ember came in from her room and climbed onto the counter stool and said, "What are we having?" Rowan turned around and looked at her daughter, really looked, the way she sometimes forgot to do because looking too closely at Ember sometimes felt like pressing on a bruise, and said, "Do you want to know the truth about your father?" Ember's cereal spoon stopped halfway to the bowl she'd pulled toward her for an after-school snack. She put it down. She looked at Rowan with those eyes. "Yes," she said. Just that. No drama, no explosion, no seizing of the moment, just yes. So Rowan told her. Not everything. Not the criminal empire, not the details of the financial collapse, not the full weight of what 8 years of silence had cost. Those were adult textures, and Ember was 7 and would get them when she was older and they would make more sense then. But the shape of it, that her father was a man named Cade, that he had left before knowing Ember was coming, that he had believed he was protecting the people he loved, and that belief had made him do something that hurt everyone, including himself, and that he had come back and that Rowan now knew where he was, and that he knew about Ember, and that he very much wanted to know her if Ember ever felt ready. Ember listened. She sat very still, which was not Ember's natural state, and she processed what she was hearing with an expression that Rowan could not read because it was not a child's expression. It was something more assembled than that, something that had been built slowly over time from a lot of quiet thinking. When Rowan finished, Ember was quiet for a moment. "Did he cry?" Ember asked. "When you told him about me?" "Not in front of me." "But he was sad." "Yes, very sad." Ember nodded slowly. "Because he missed things." "Yes." "Like my birthday." A pause. "My birthdays." "Yes." Another pause, this one longer. Ember picked up the spoon and put it back down without using it. "Does he know about the trap?" Despite everything, the weight of the conversation, the note from Mrs. Chandra folded in her pocket, the 11 days of uncertainty still sitting in her chest, Rowan almost smiled. "I mentioned it." "What did he say?" "He said you sounded like someone he'd be terrified to disappoint." Something happened in Ember's face, something small and careful and not quite a smile, more like the precursor to a smile, the cellular structure that a smile is built from. She looked at the counter for a moment, and then she looked back at Rowan. "I'll meet him first," Ember said quietly. "Then I'll decide." Rowan looked at her daughter, 7 years old, sitting on a kitchen stool with a bowl of cereal she hadn't touched, deciding the future with more measured clarity than most adults managed. "Okay," Rowan said, "but you come too." "Of course. And it has to be somewhere I can leave if I want to." "Absolutely." Ember nodded, like this concluded the relevant portion of the negotiation. She pulled the cereal bowl toward her and picked up the spoon. Then she said, without looking up, "Mom, I'm not scared." "I know, Bug. I just want my main question answered." She ate a spoonful of cereal. Thought about it. "The one about whether he would have stayed." Rowan held very still. "What do you think the answer is?" Ember asked. She had prepared in some distant corner of her mind for many versions of this conversation. She had not prepared for Ember to ask her directly what she believed, which was both more intimate and more difficult than any of the other versions. "I think," Rowan said carefully, "that the answer is yes. I think he would have stayed." Ember ate another spoonful, considered this, looked up. "Then I want to meet him." The kitchen was warm and smelled like the pasta Rowan hadn't finished making, and outside the window, the last thin light of a March evening was going blue against the edges of the city's buildings, and Rowan Vale stood at the counter of her own kitchen and understood that the conversation she had been dreading for 2 years had just happened and the world had not ended, and her daughter had just made, with total calm, the bravest decision in this family's recent history. She turned back to the stove. "Wash your hands," she said. "You can help with the sauce. It better not have those tomato chunks." "It's always had those tomato chunks. And I've always hated them." "I know." Rowan turned the burner on. "I make it that way anyway." "That's not love, Mom. That's oppression." Rowan laughed. A real one, sudden and unprepared, the kind that came from somewhere deeper than the surface. And Ember slid off the stool to wash her hands. And for a few minutes, the kitchen was just a kitchen, and they were just 2 people making dinner, and the weight of the decision they had just made together sat quietly in the room with them like a third presence, large and irrevocable, and somehow, against all Rowan's expectations, not crushing. But later, after Ember was asleep and the apartment was quiet, Rowan sat at the kitchen table with her phone in both hands and the folded paper from her nightstand in front of her, and she thought, "There's no going back from this now." She had told Ember the truth. Ember had said yes. Whatever happened next was going to happen to both of them, not just to Rowan, and that was the thing that made her hands go slightly cold. Not the decision itself, but the way it had multiplied in scope the moment Ember said, "I'll meet him first." Because Rowan could absorb a mistake. She had built her entire adult life on the architecture of absorbing pain and continuing to function. But Ember was 7 and still building, and if this went wrong, it would build itself into her in ways that couldn't be undone. She picked up the phone and dialed. He answered on the first ring this time. "She wants to meet you," Rowan said. "On her terms. Somewhere she can leave if she needs to. I'll be there the entire time." A silence that had more feeling in it than anything he might have said. "When?" he managed. "Saturday. 2 weeks from now." She paused. "My mother is coming." Okay. She's going to be direct with you." "I'd expect that." "She's already decided she doesn't trust you. You should know that going in." "That seems fair," he said quietly. Rowan looked at the dark kitchen window. "Cade." She stopped, started again. "If you let her down, I will not give you a second chance. I will not negotiate it, and I will not revisit it. If you disappoint her, then I'm gone," he said, "and I stay gone." She believed him. She wasn't sure if believing him made things better or more frightening, and she sat with that uncertainty for a moment. "There's a cafe on 9th Avenue, she said. "Near the river. It's quiet on Saturday mornings. Not too crowded. She needs a way out if she needs one." "I'll be there early," he said. "I'll find a table near the door." "And Cade," she paused, "don't bring anything. No gifts, nothing with a bow on it. She'll see through it, and it'll make everything harder." A pause. "What does she need?" "She needs you to listen," Rowan said. "That's it. She needs to see that you're someone who actually listens." She hung up, folded her hands on the table. Outside the kitchen window, Calgary was dark and wide, and the streets were wet with the beginning of a thaw that would reverse itself 2 more times before spring actually arrived, and Rowan Vale sat in her kitchen at 11:30 at night and understood, with the particular clarity that comes only after a door closes behind you, that she had just passed the point of no return. Ember had said yes. The meeting was set, and the question was no longer whether this would happen. The question was who all 3 of them would be when it did. The 2 weeks before the meeting were the longest of Rowan's adult life, and she had lived through some long stretches. She functioned. That was what she did. She was very good at functioning under conditions that would reduce other people to stillness. She worked her shifts. She picked Ember up from school. She made dinners that were nutritionally complete and emotionally hollow. She answered her mother's texts with the correct number of words to signal that she was fine, without inviting follow-up questions she didn't have answers to. She slept badly and woke at 4 a.m. with the particular alertness of someone whose nervous system had decided that sleep was a luxury, and vigilance was the only responsible option. On Thursday of the first week, Dara pulled her aside between patients and said, "You look like you're made of wire right now." "I'm fine." "You said that exactly the same way you say it to patients right before you order the psych consult." Rowan looked at her. "I have 3 charts to finish." Rowan. "I'm fine, Dara." She picked up the charts. "Thank you." She went back to work. Dara let her, which was one of the things Rowan appreciated about Dara. She knew when a door was closed. Ember, for her part, was unnervingly calm. She went to school, worked on her trap, ate dinner, asked precisely 0 follow-up questions about the upcoming meeting, and went to bed at the correct time without being reminded. This was so contrary to her normal operating procedure that it was its own kind of alarm bell. And on day 10, Rowan sat on the edge of Ember's bed after lights out and said, "You can ask me things, if you have questions." Ember was quiet for a moment. In the dark, she was just a shape, her hair spread on the pillow, her breathing slow and deliberate. "I'm saving them," Ember said. "Saving them. For him. For Saturday." A pause. "I made a list." Rowan looked at the ceiling. "Of course you did. It's a good list. I know it is. I have 7 questions." A pause. 8 if you count the main one. The main one. Whether he would have stayed. Her voice in the dark was careful and neutral, the voice of someone who has thought about a thing for so long it has stopped having raw edges. That one I have to ask him myself, to see his face when he answers. Rowan sat with her daughter in the dark for another few minutes without speaking, because there was nothing to say that would improve upon the silence, and then she kissed her on the forehead and went to bed and stared at the ceiling until 4 a.m. arrived exactly on schedule. Saturday morning came in gray and cold, a flat sky pressing low over Calgary, the kind of March day that couldn't decide if it was still winter or had simply forgotten to end. Rowan got up at 6, which was unnecessary. The cafe didn't open until 8:30, and stood in the kitchen drinking coffee while the city was still mostly dark. She heard Ember up at 7. Her daughter appeared in the kitchen doorway, already dressed, which had never happened voluntarily in 7 years, in her best flannel shirt and the dark jeans Rowan had bought her in February. Her hair was brushed. She was holding her notebook, small and green and rubber-banded shut. "You're dressed," Rowan said. "I told you, 7 questions." 8. 8. Ember climbed onto the stool and looked at Rowan's coffee. "Can I have hot chocolate?" "Yes." "At the cafe, I mean, not here." "Yes." Ember nodded, opened the notebook, closed it again, looked out the window at the gray sky. "Mom." "Yeah." "What if I don't like him?" Rowan put down her coffee. She looked at her daughter directly, the way Ember had asked her to do when something was important. "Look at me when it matters, Mom," Ember had said at age 5 in a moment of startling self-knowledge. "Then we go home, and we figure out what comes next from there. Together. And you won't be upset? About what you feel? Never." Ember absorbed this, looked at the notebook. "What if I do like him?" Rowan said, "Then we figure out what comes next from there, too." "There's a lot of figuring out." "There is." Ember sat with that for a moment. "Okay," she said finally. "Hot chocolate. Let's go. Mayat." Sylvia arrived at 9:15, 15 minutes before they were due at the cafe, and she stood in Rowan's hallway, in her good coat with her reading glasses pushed up on her head, and looked at her granddaughter and said, "You look like you're going somewhere important." "I am," Ember said. "Good." Sylvia crouched down. She had bad knees and did it with the controlled grimace of someone accustomed to ignoring them, and looked Ember in the face. "You know you don't have to decide anything today. Not one single thing. You just go in there and you're yourself and you see what you see." "I have questions," Ember said. "Ask every single one of them." "What if he can't answer some of them?" Sylvia looked at her granddaughter. "Then that's an answer too." Ember thought about this, nodded slowly, like a small scientist hearing a hypothesis that has merit. "Okay." She looked at Rowan. "We should go. I want to be there before him." Rowan looked at her mother. Sylvia straightened up with the knee grimace, met her daughter's eyes, and communicated, in the wordless vocabulary of 30 years, something between "I know" and "go" and "I'm right behind you." They went. The cafe on 9th Avenue was called Riverside Grounds, a place Rowan had chosen deliberately for its 2 exits, its wide windows, and the fact that it was the kind of small, unhurried space where nobody would bother a 7-year-old who needed to leave. They arrived at 9:28. Cade was already there. He was sitting at a table near the front window. Not the door, but close to it, which she had told him would matter, and he had listened, with a coffee in front of him that he wasn't drinking and his coat folded on the chair beside him. He looked up when they came in, and something moved across his face that he absorbed quickly, the way you absorb a physical shock. He stood. Rowan had thought she was prepared to see him again. She had rehearsed this moment the way she rehearsed difficult patient conversations, ran it through mentally, identified the likely emotional landmines, planned her footing. She was not prepared for the specific reality of watching Cade Mercer see his daughter for the first time. He went very still. The kind of still that is not calm but is its exact opposite. Stillness as a response to something moving very fast inside. Stillness as the only available container. Ember stopped a few feet inside the door and looked at him. She tilted her head slightly in a way Rowan had seen her do since she was 3 years old, when she was assessing something she wasn't sure about yet. She said, "You have a scar above your eyebrow." Cade touched it reflexively with 2 fingers, dropped his hand. "I do." "My mom fixed that." He nodded. "She did." His voice was very controlled and very quiet. "She's good at her job." "She's the best," Ember said, with the absolute confidence of a child who has never considered that this might be subjective. She moved to the table and pulled out a chair. Not the one closest to him, but the one across from him, maintaining the width of the table between them, which was smart, and which Rowan recognized as deliberate. "I'm Ember." "I know." He sat back down slowly, like he was trying very hard not to do anything too quickly. I'm Cade. I know. She set her notebook on the table. I have questions. He looked at the notebook, then at her. Okay. 8 of them. Okay. Some of them are hard. You can ask them. Ember opened the notebook to the first page, studied it, looked up. Why did you leave? Cade looked at her steadily. He had clearly prepared for this question, or tried to. His eyes were clear and his jaw was set, and he said carefully, I was scared that the trouble my father was in would hurt people I cared about, so I left to try to protect them. I thought I was doing the right thing. I was wrong. Ember considered this. Were you scared of the trouble, or scared of getting in trouble? A silence. Something shifted in Cade's expression, brief, unguarded. Both, he said. I was scared of both. Ember wrote something in the notebook. Rowan, sitting beside her, watched her daughter's small, careful handwriting appear on the page and felt a feeling she couldn't name, something in the territory between terror and awe. Question 2, Ember said. The 8 questions took 40 minutes. Rowan tracked them not by time, but by the arc of Ember's posture, which she knew better than she knew almost anything in the world, tight and contained at the beginning, still cautious at question 4, and then, somewhere between question 5 and 6, a small and barely perceptible easing in the line of her shoulders. Not trust. Not yet. But the thing that precedes trust, the first shift in a position you've held for a long time. The 6th question was, if you had known about me, would you have stayed? Cade looked at her for a long moment. He did not look away, and he did not hedge, and he said, quietly and clearly, yes, without question. Ember looked at him. How do I know that's true? You don't, he said. Not yet. I can't prove it to you right now. I can only show you over time. That's the only way anyone can actually prove something like that. She wrote in the notebook again. Looked up. That's a good answer. Is it? It's honest. I don't like when adults tell me something is definitely true when it can't be definitely true yet. That's the kind of answer that's really just hoping you'll stop asking. Cade was quiet for a moment. How old did you say you were? 7? Almost 8? Right. August 14th. He absorbed that. Another birthday he had missed, one approaching, the arithmetic of absence visible in his face for just a second before he controlled it. I'll remember that, he said. You should. She closed the notebook. I have one more, but it's not on the list. Okay. What's your trap building experience? Cade blinked. My mom said you knew I was building a trap. Do you know anything about tension distribution? Rowan watched Cade Mercer, wealthy, reformed, trying so hard to be careful and measured, visibly recalibrate every expectation he had arrived with. I have a mechanical engineering degree, he said slowly. I've never built a trap specifically, but I understand tension distribution. Ember looked at him for a long moment. Then she said, with the gravity of someone extending a significant professional courtesy, I might need a consultant. Something happened in Cade's face that was not quite a smile, but was what a smile is made from. That same cellular precursor that Rowan had seen in Ember's face 2 weeks ago and recognized now with a small, disorienting shock because it was identical, and the identicalness of it was something she had no framework for yet. Sylvia, sitting beside Rowan, put her hand briefly over her daughter's on the table. Rowan looked down at the hands, did not say anything. After an hour and 20 minutes, Ember announced that she needed the bathroom and took herself off, which left Rowan and Sylvia at the table with Cade and a new quality of silence. The ease of the last part of the hour evaporated, and something more serious settled in its place. Sylvia looked at Cade over her coffee cup. You have an engineering degree, she said. Yes. And the money. Your company now. Is it clean? Cade didn't flinch. Completely. 3 different audits in the last 4 years. I rebuilt from nothing after my father's situation. The company I run now has no connection to anything he was involved in. I looked you up, Sylvia said. Mercer Infrastructure Solutions, incorporated 6 years ago. Before that, nothing in your name that I could find. I used a different name for 2 years, he said. While the investigation was ongoing, my father's lawyers advised it. He paused. His name was linked to mine. It was protective. For you or for the people around you? For everyone. He met her eyes. I know it looks like running. I know everything about those years looks like running. I can't change what it looks like. Sylvia set down her cup. She had a hard first year, she said. Rowan, I want you to understand that. She was pregnant and alone, and she was working as much as she could, and she didn't tell many people, and she managed it because she is the kind of person who manages things, but it cost her. She held his gaze and did not look away. It cost her things she won't tell you about, and probably won't ever tell you about. I'm telling you so that you understand the full size of what you're asking to walk into. Cade said nothing for a moment. I understand it, he said, or I'm starting to. I don't think I understand it fully yet. No, Sylvia agreed, you don't. I'd like to earn the right to understand it. Sylvia looked at him for a long time. Then she looked at Rowan, and Rowan watched her mother's face do the thing it did when she had made a decision she wasn't entirely pleased about, but was going to stand behind, a small setting, like a lock turning. One chance, Sylvia said to Cade. That's what my daughter is giving you. Don't mistake it for a starting position in a negotiation. I know what it is, he said quietly. Good. Ember came back from the bathroom, climbed into her chair, and reached for her hot chocolate, which she had been nursing for the duration of the meeting with the patience of someone who knows a good thing is worth conserving. She looked at Cade. She looked at Sylvia. She looked at Rowan. Are we done talking about serious things? She asked. A pause. Then Cade said, What would you like to talk about instead? The trap, Ember said. The tension distribution problem. I've been using rubber bands, but I think I need to switch materials, and I don't know what to switch to. Cade leaned forward, elbows on the table, and said, What's the trap designed to catch? Currently? Anything that walks across the trigger plate. She paused. Theoretically. How wide is the trigger plate? 8 inches. And the rubber bands are losing tension after how long? About 2 hours. Ember looked at him with narrowed eyes. The look of someone testing whether the other party actually knows what they're talking about, which is not long enough. No, Cade agreed. You need spring steel or braided cord. Rubber degrades under sustained load. He thought about it. What's your release mechanism? What followed was 12 minutes of the most specific conversation about cardboard engineering Rowan had ever witnessed, and she sat beside her mother and watched her daughter talk to her father about trap mechanics with increasing animated energy. The notebook open again now, but filled with diagrams instead of questions. And Ember's hands moved the way they always moved when she was excited about something, fast and precise, sketching in the air. And Cade's hands moved in response, mirroring the gesture without seeming to notice he was doing it. And Rowan looked at that mirrored gesture and felt something crack open in her chest that wasn't grief exactly and wasn't joy exactly, but was the space between them. The precise location where one thing ends and another begins. Her phone buzzed. She glanced at it out of reflex. An unknown number. She let it go. It buzzed again immediately. She picked it up, looked at the screen, and felt every warm thing in the room go cold. The text read, I need to talk to you about Cade Mercer. I know what he didn't tell you. Meet me today. This is not a threat. This is worse. Rowan stared at the screen. She became aware, slowly, of Sylvia beside her, of the warmth of the cafe, of Ember's voice still explaining the trigger plate problem to Cade across the table, of the gray light through the window, of the city outside continuing in its ordinary way. She typed back, Who is this? The response came in under 20 seconds. My name is Daniel Mercer. I'm Cade's younger brother. And there's a reason he never mentioned me. Rowan put the phone face down on the table. She looked at Cade, who was bent over Ember's notebook, helping draw a modified trigger plate, his face open and focused and present in a way she had spent 2 weeks deciding to trust. Her mother noticed. Sylvia's hand found her arm under the table. A question without words. Rowan shook her head slightly. Not here. Not now. She looked at her daughter, who was laughing at something Cade had drawn, laughing with her whole face the way Ember laughed at things that genuinely delighted her. And she sat with the weight of what was in her pocket, and she did not move, did not speak, did not let anything she was feeling reach her face, but her mind was already running. A brother. A brother Cade had never mentioned, not in the ER, not on the phone, not at the cafe today. In 2 weeks of careful, measured disclosure about his father's collapse and the criminal investigation and the reasons he had disappeared, in all of that, not one word about a brother. The question was not whether that omission was significant. The question was what it meant. She texted Daniel Mercer from the car while Ember was buckled in the back and Sylvia was still saying goodbye to Cade on the sidewalk, one hand shielding her phone from view out of a habit she couldn't account for, because Ember was looking out the window and not at her, but still. Where? The response came while she was watching Sylvia shake Cade's hand, correctly, formally, the handshake of someone withholding final judgment. And Cade looking at the car's rear window where Ember had pressed her hand flat against the glass in what Rowan could only describe as a wave that was also a statement. Coffee. Bridgeland. 2 hours. I'll send you the address. She put the phone in her jacket, started the car. Rowan looked in the rearview mirror. Yeah? He doesn't try too hard. I hate when adults try too hard. Ember pressed her nose briefly against the window as they pulled away. He just listened. I noticed. His hands do this thing. Ember demonstrated, a small, unconscious sketching gesture. When he's explaining something, like he's drawing in the air. Rowan watched the road, said nothing. I do that, Ember said. I didn't know I did it until I saw him do it. The car was quiet for a moment. Outside, Calgary moved past in its gray morning way. So? Ember said. What happens next? It was the exact question Rowan could not answer, because 2 hours from now she was going to sit across from a man she'd never heard of until 20 minutes ago, who claimed to be Cade Mercer's brother, who said he knew something that Cade hadn't told her, and who had described it not as bad news, not as a problem, but as something worse. And that specific word was still sitting in her chest like something with edges. We figure it out, Rowan said. Together? Together. Ember seemed satisfied with this. She opened her notebook to the trap diagrams and studied them the rest of the way home, her small finger tracing the modified trigger plate design. And she didn't ask any more questions, and Rowan drove through the gray Calgary morning with both hands on the wheel and her jaw set and the particular focused stillness of a person who has understood, with sudden and complete clarity, that the ground she thought she was standing on may never have been as solid as it felt. The address Daniel Mercer sent her was a coffee shop in Bridgeland, east of downtown, small and unpretentious. The kind of place chosen specifically because it was not the kind of place anyone would know you. She arrived 11 minutes after the agreed time. She'd had to drop Ember at her friend Nadia's house and navigate a conversation with Nadia's mother that she did not have bandwidth for, and scanned the room from the door. She found him because he looked like Cade. Not exactly. Younger by perhaps 5 years, less composed, with something rawer in his face and the look of a man who had not slept well in recent memory. He was at a corner table with 2 coffees in front of him, and he looked up when she came in, and she saw him recognize her with the particular jolt of someone who has been waiting and is now suddenly uncertain that they wanted what they asked for. She crossed the room and sat down without taking her coat off. You have 10 minutes, she said. Start. He started. What he said took longer than 10 minutes. What he said took the better part of 40 minutes, and by the time he finished, Rowan's coffee was cold in front of her, and she had not moved since approximately minute 6, when the thing he was telling her had moved from unexpected to significant to something she did not yet have a word for. Cade's father's financial empire had collapsed. Yes, that part was true. What Cade had not told her, what he had very carefully and very deliberately never told her, was that the collapse had not been accidental. Someone inside had triggered it, a deliberate report to financial regulators. Specific, detailed, accurate. The kind of report that only someone with complete inside knowledge could produce. Cade had produced it. Cade had been cooperating with federal investigators for 14 months before the collapse. He had been the one who handed them everything. The accounts, the shell companies, the paper trail that eventually put 2 men in federal custody, including, Rowan understood now with a cold, clear lurch in her stomach, Cade's own father. He had not left to protect the people he loved from his father's trouble. He had been the one who created the trouble. He had been the source. He told everyone he left to protect them, Daniel said. He was not unkind in the way he said it, which somehow made it worse. And there is a version of that that's true. He did believe the fallout would be dangerous. He did believe people near him could get caught in the edge of it. He looked at the table. But he had been building the case against my father for over a year before the collapse. He chose to do that. He chose it, and he kept it secret, and when it was done, he left. Not just because it was dangerous, but because he knew what he'd done and he couldn't. He stopped. He couldn't look at any of us. He couldn't look at me. I didn't find out until 2 years later, and I found out from a federal document, not from him. Rowan sat very still. I'm not telling you he's a bad person, Daniel said. I'm not even sure I'm telling you he made the wrong decision. Our father was doing real harm. What Cade reported was real. But he built a version of this story that makes him the sacrifice, and that's not the whole truth. And if he's in your life now, if he's near your daughter, you deserve the whole truth. Rowan looked at him. Why are you telling me this? Daniel met her eyes. Because I have a niece I've never met, he said quietly. And I'd like to know her too someday. And I cannot start that. I cannot be any part of that, with this thing sitting in the middle of it. She pushed back from the table. I need to go, she said. Rowan, I need to go. She stood. Her coat was still on. She had never taken it off. She picked up her bag and she looked at Daniel Mercer's tired, uncertain face across the coffee table, and she said, Don't contact me again until I reach out first. She walked out into the cold. The wind off the river hit her the moment she cleared the door, and she stopped on the sidewalk and stood there in the thin gray light, and the air moved around her, and she breathed it in and breathed it out, and thought, with a precision that felt almost clinical, he lied to me. Not about everything, not clumsily. He had told her a version of the truth carefully calibrated to make him comprehensible, to make his absence survivable, to give her a story she could hold. I left to protect you. That was partial and true and completely inadequate. He had not left because he was afraid of his father's trouble. He had been building his father's destruction while she was falling in love with him. He had been building it while she was building a life with him, and he had never told her. And when it was over, he had disappeared and left her with a version of events that made him a sacrifice instead of an architect. Her phone buzzed. Cade. Ember texted me from her friend's house. She wants to show me the trap tomorrow. I told her I'd check with you first. Whatever you decide. She looked at the message. She thought about Ember's hand sketching in the air. She thought about the mirrored gesture. She thought about, I'll meet him first, then I'll decide. And about he just listened. And about 8 questions in a green notebook and a hot chocolate conserved with patience. Then she thought about 14 months of deliberate work, and a federal report, and a father handed to investigators, and a story told with careful omissions, and a man who had, in 2 weeks of what she had been allowing herself to believe was honesty, never once said, There is a brother you should know about, and he knows something I haven't told you. She put the phone in her pocket. She started walking. The river was visible at the end of the block, flat and gray and indifferent, moving the way it always moved, regardless of what was happening on its banks. And Rowan Vale walked toward it with her jaw set and her hands balled in her pockets and understood, with every step, that the woman she had been this morning, cautious, terrified, beginning to hope, was going to have to become something harder before the day was done. Because Ember had laughed in that cafe. Ember had opened her notebook and drawn diagrams and said he doesn't try too hard and pressed her hand flat against the car window. And Rowan could not take that back. She would not take it back. But she could not give her daughter a foundation built on a story with holes in it either. And the only way forward now was through the truth. The whole truth. The part Cade had kept back. The part that changed the shape of everything. And whether that truth destroyed what had barely begun or somehow survived it, Rowan Vale was going to find out. Because she had not spent 8 years raising a daughter who asked questions to now accept a version of events that had been curated for her comfort. She pulled out her phone. She opened Cade's message. She typed, We need to talk. Not tomorrow. Tonight. Without Ember. She sent it. Then she stood on the riverbank in the cold gray afternoon and waited for the reply. And the river moved past her in its indifferent way. And the city sat around her in its ordinary noise, and nothing on the outside of her was visible. But inside, something that had been tentatively opening for 2 weeks was pulling tight again, like a wound that has been disturbed before it was ready, like a door swinging back toward closed. Cade replied in 4 minutes. Tonight. Whatever you need. Tell me where. She didn't reply immediately. She stood on the riverbank for another few minutes in the cold, watching the water move, and she let the anger sit where it was, not feeding it, not suppressing it, just acknowledging its presence the way she acknowledged a patient's pain before deciding what to do about it. Anger was information. She had learned that in nursing, and she had learned it the harder way in her personal life, and the lesson had cost enough that she wasn't going to waste it by acting before she was ready. She texted back, "My apartment, 8 o'clock. Ember will be at my mother's." Then she called Sylvia. Her mother answered on the first ring, which meant she'd been waiting, which meant Sylvia had already registered that something had shifted at the cafe and had been sitting on the knowledge that a call was coming. "Can you take Ember tonight?" Rowan said, a pause. "How bad?" "I don't know yet. But something happened." "Something happened." She looked at the river. "I can't explain it right now. I need tonight without her in the apartment." Sylvia was quiet for exactly 2 seconds, long enough to make a decision, short enough that Rowan didn't have to sit in uncertainty. "I'll be there by 6. We'll do a movie night. She'll think it's a treat." "It is a treat." "Rowan." Her mother's voice, the particular register of it when she was being careful. "Are you safe?" "Yes." "Is this about Cade?" "Yes." Another 2-second pause. "Do you want me there when you talk to him?" "No." She said it without hesitation. "This one I need to do alone." "All right." Sylvia didn't argue it. "I'll bring the good popcorn for Ember. Call me after." She hung up. Rowan put the phone in her pocket and looked at the gray water for another moment, and then she turned and walked back through Bridgeland toward where she'd parked, and the city moved around her in its ordinary Saturday afternoon way. People walking dogs, a couple with a stroller, 2 teenagers on the corner sharing earbuds. And none of it knew what she was carrying, and none of it needed to. Sylvia arrived at 5:58. Ember accepted the movie night with the enthusiasm of someone who suspected nothing and simply appreciated good fortune, grabbed her overnight bag from the closet where it lived in permanent readiness, kissed Rowan on the cheek and said, "Don't stay up too late being anxious." Rowan stared at her. "I'm not anxious." "You make that face." Ember demonstrated, apparently, Rowan's anxious face, which was some compressed arrangement of features that Rowan had not been aware was visible to the outside world. "You've been making it since the cafe." "I'm fine." "That's what you always say before you're actually fine later." She shouldered the bag. "I'll be okay, Mom. We all will." She said it with the infuriating calm of someone who has already done the emotional processing and moved through to the other side, which was remarkable for a 7-year-old and also, at this specific moment, deeply inconvenient because it made Rowan feel like the least composed person in the apartment. The door closed. The apartment went quiet. Rowan stood in the kitchen and looked at the space and let the quiet settle around her, and then she went to the sink and ran cold water over her wrists because her pulse was too high and she knew it, and she breathed slowly and deliberately the way she breathed in the ER when a situation was trying to get ahead of her. And she got herself to something approaching functional. She put the kettle on. She sat at the kitchen table. She waited. Cade knocked at 8 o'clock exactly. She knew it was him because she'd given him the apartment number when she texted the address. And the knock was the knock of someone trying to be neither too assertive nor too tentative and landing somewhere in the strained middle. The knock of a person who is aware they are arriving to something they can't fully read and is trying not to presume. She opened the door. He looked at her face and she watched him register, in the first 2 seconds, that this was different from the cafe. His expression shifted, not alarm, but readiness, the tightening of someone who can feel the temperature of a room before they walk into it. "Come in," she said. He came in. He did not take off his coat immediately, which she noticed. The coat stayed on, like a man keeping his options open. He stood in her kitchen and looked around it briefly, taking in Ember's drawings on the refrigerator, the rubber band trap parts on the counter, the green notebook that Ember had left open to the trigger plate diagram. He looked at the notebook for a moment, then at Rowan. "Sit down," she said. He sat. She stayed standing. Not intentionally. She simply couldn't sit. Her body wouldn't agree to stillness right now. And she stood at the counter with her arms crossed and looked at him across the kitchen and said, without preamble, without warm-up, "Tell me about Daniel." The change in him was immediate and total. Not guilt. It was faster and colder than guilt. It was the look of someone who has been running ahead of something for a long time and has just heard it catch up. His jaw set. His hands, which had been resting on the table, went still in a different way. The stillness of control, not calm. "Where did you hear that name?" he said. "He texted me. At the cafe, while you were teaching Ember about spring steel." Something moved across Cade's face that she couldn't fully categorize. Not just the caught-out expression of someone with a secret exposed. Something older and heavier than that. Something that had been living in him for a while. "He texted you directly." "He met me in Bridgeland 2 hours after the cafe." She watched his face. "He told me about the federal investigation, about your cooperation, about 14 months of building a case against your father while you were—" She stopped, controlled her voice. "While you were in a relationship with me." Cade looked at the table. "Is it true?" she said. A long silence. Then, "Yes." The single word landed in the kitchen and sat there. She had known it was coming. Daniel had been specific and calm, and the kind of specific that doesn't have the texture of a lie. But hearing it from Cade's mouth was different from hearing it from his brother's. Hearing it from Cade was the confirmation that made it real. "You were cooperating with federal investigators for over a year before the collapse," she said. Her voice was even. She was working to keep it even. "You built the case. You handed them your father." "Yes." "And then you left." "Yes." "And you told me—" She stopped, breathed. "You told me you left to protect me from the fallout of your father's situation, as if it were something that happened to you." Cade looked up. "That's not entirely—" "Don't." Her voice came out sharp and she let it. "Don't qualify it right now. Tell me what's true." He was quiet for a moment. His jaw worked. She could see the cost of this in his face. Not performance, not calculation, just the actual cost of arriving at the moment you've been avoiding and finding it exactly as difficult as you knew it would be. "My father was laundering money through 3 companies, Cade said. He had been doing it for 9 years. I found out when I was 26. Not because I was investigating him. I found a document I wasn't supposed to find, in a file I was pulling for a legitimate meeting." He looked at the table. "I spent 2 weeks trying to decide what to do, and then I made a decision. To report him. To report him. To the federal authorities." "Yes." "And you didn't tell me." He looked at her. "I couldn't tell you. If I had told you, you would have been connected to the decision. You could have been considered complicit in withholding it. I was trying to protect—" "Stop saying that!" Her voice cracked on the last word, and she felt it crack and pressed forward through it. "Stop using protection as the word for every decision you made unilaterally about my life. You did not protect me. You managed me. You decided what I could know and what I couldn't, and then when it was over, you disappeared and left me a version of events where you were the person who suffered. And I have spent 8 years—" She stopped. Her hands were shaking. She pressed them flat on the counter. 8 years raising a daughter and thinking you left because you were afraid. Not because you were already in the middle of something you chose to be in the middle of. "I was afraid," he said. "That part is true. I was afraid of what would happen to you if you were near me when it landed. But that's not all of it." A pause. "No," he said quietly. "That's not all of it." "Then what's the rest?" He was silent for a moment. His hands were flat on the table, his eyes on the grain of the wood, and she watched him arrive at something. The particular visible struggle of a person making a decision about how much truth they have left to give. "I was ashamed," he said. She waited. "I handed my father to federal investigators," Cade said. "He is in prison right now because of what I gave them. And I know it was right. I know the harm he was doing was real. And I know the decision I made was— I stand by it. But I could not look at the people who knew me and have them know that I was the one who did it. I couldn't look at Daniel. I couldn't—" He stopped. His voice had roughened. "I couldn't look at you." Rowan stared at him. "I left because I was ashamed," he said. "Not just afraid. Both. And I built a story that was easier to carry and easier to tell. And I told it to myself long enough that it started to feel more true than the rest of it." He finally looked up. His eyes were clear and there was nothing performed in his face right now. No management, no calibration, just a man sitting in someone else's kitchen with 8 years of weight in his expression. "That's the whole truth. I'm sorry it took this long to get here." The kitchen was very quiet. Outside the window, a car passed. The refrigerator hummed. Ember's trap parts sat on the counter with their diagrams and their rubber bands and their small, precise chaos, and Rowan looked at them and felt something in her chest that was too complicated to name, rage and grief, and something underneath both of them that she could not afford to examine right now. "You have a brother," she said, "who exists and who you never mentioned." "Yes." "Why?" "Because telling you about Daniel meant explaining why he doesn't speak to me." He said it flatly. "And explaining that meant telling you everything else. And I wasn't—" He stopped. "I wanted time. I wanted Ember to have the meeting first. I was going to tell you." "When?" "I don't know." He said it honestly, which was the only thing at this moment she could give him any credit for. "I don't know exactly when, but I was going to." "You were going to," she repeated. "Yes." "On your timeline. When you were ready." "Yes." She looked at him. "Do you see the problem with that?" He looked at her steadily. "Yes." "Do you see how that is the same pattern, the same exact pattern, deciding for me what I can know and when I can know it, that you have been running for 8 years?" A silence. Something shifted in his face, a slow, visible shift, like a man watching something come into focus that he'd been keeping deliberately blurry. "Yes," he said, "I see it. And Ember." Her voice hardened. "She has an uncle she doesn't know about. Another person connected to her that has been kept in a box while you manage the information." Cade closed his eyes briefly, opened them. "Daniel wants to know her," he said. "He told you that." "He told me he couldn't begin that with this sitting in the middle of it." She pushed off the counter. "He was more honest with me in 40 minutes than you have been in 2 weeks." That landed. She saw it land. Cade's jaw tightened and his eyes went briefly closed again, and he absorbed it the way you absorb something that is both a strike and a truth simultaneously, without the option of deflecting one from the other. "I know," he said. "I need you to leave," Rowan said. He looked up sharply. "Not permanently." She held up a hand. I'm not making a permanent decision tonight, but I need you to leave right now because I am very close to saying things that I'll regret. And I have a daughter who laughed in a cafe today and pressed her hand against a car window, and I cannot let what I'm feeling right now make a decision that affects her without thinking it through first." Cade stood, slowly. He picked up nothing because he hadn't set anything down, the coat still on, and he looked at her across the kitchen with an expression that was not asking for anything. No plea, no argument, no reaching for her sympathy, just a man looking at the full size of what he'd done and not looking away from it. "I should have told you everything in the hospital," he said, "the first day, or on the phone, or at the cafe. I had multiple chances and I chose the easier version every time." He looked at the table. "That is who I have been with you. It's not who I want to be." "Then be someone different," Rowan said. "But you don't get to do that in my kitchen tonight." He nodded. He walked to the door. He had his hand on the handle when she said, "Cade." He stopped, didn't turn. "Does your father know about Ember?" A pause that lasted long enough to tell her everything before he answered. "No," he said. "Does he know about me? Specifically? By name?" Another pause, shorter. "He knew I was in a relationship before the collapse. He didn't know your name." He turned then, slightly, just enough that she could see the side of his face. "He's been in federal custody for 6 years, Rowan. He has no access. He has lawyers," she said. "He has correspondence. He has people who work for him who are not in custody." She looked at him. "Has he tried to contact you since you came back?" The silence this time was the longest of the night. "Yes," Cade said. The word fell into the kitchen like something heavy. "How many times?" Rowan said. Her voice was very flat now, the flatness that came not from calm but from the complete expenditure of shock, from arriving at a place past surprise. 4 times in the last 8 months, through lawyers." "What does he want?" "He wants me to recant." Cade turned fully now, and his face was controlled, but the control was costing him. She could see the cost in the line of his shoulders, in the way his hand had dropped from the door handle. "My testimony was central to the prosecution. If I recant, his lawyers file for a new hearing. He's been building a case, claiming coercion." "And have you?" she said. "Recanted." "No." Immediately. "No." "But he's still trying. Yes. She looked at him, really looked. And what she saw was not the version she had met in the ER, the careful, reformed man with the splinted arm and the measured disclosures, but something more complicated and less resolved, a man still inside a situation that had not finished with him yet, still connected by thin, dangerous threads to a world he had tried to leave. "You are not out of this," she said slowly. "You are not free of it. I'm working on it. That is not the same as being free of it." "I know." "And you brought this to my door." Her voice was rising. She made herself lower it. "You showed up at my ER. You told my daughter about spring steel. You sat at my kitchen table, and you are still inside a situation involving a man in federal custody who has lawyers and wants something from you, and you didn't think that was relevant information for the mother of your child." Cade looked at her. "I didn't want to scare you." "I am scared," she said. "I am scared right now." "That is the correct response to what you just told me." She pointed at the door. "Go. I need you to go." He went. The door closed behind him, and Rowan stood in her kitchen, and the apartment was very quiet, and Ember's trap parts were on the counter, and the refrigerator hummed, and outside a car alarm went off somewhere in the building's parking lot and ran for 30 seconds and then stopped, and the silence that came after it was enormous. She called her mother at 9:15. Not to tell her everything. Not tonight, not with Ember within earshot, even if she was theoretically asleep. Just to hear Sylvia's voice, which she would not admit to anyone, but was sometimes the only thing that made the world feel like it had solid edges. "How did it go?" Sylvia said. "Complicated." "More complicated than before?" "Yes." She sat on the kitchen floor. She didn't know why the floor, except that it was low and solid, and the ground was what you needed when the ceiling felt like it was pressing down. "Mom, I need to ask you something, and I need you to answer honestly, not carefully." "When have I ever answered carefully?" "Fair point." She pressed her back against the cabinet. "Do you think a person can change the pattern of how they handle the truth? Actually change it. Not just decide to, but actually do it differently." Sylvia was quiet for a moment. "I think some people can," she said. "I think it takes longer than they believe it will, and more effort than they expect, and more failure before they get it right. And if they're still in the middle of something, if they haven't actually gotten free of the thing that made them that way, then the change hasn't been tested yet," Sylvia said simply. "Deciding to be different in calm water is not the same as being different in a storm." Rowan looked at the ceiling. "Ember pressed her hand on the car window when we left." "I know. She told me. She showed me the trap diagram." A pause. "She's already decided, Rowan. You know that. She decided in the cafe." "I know. So the question is what you do with that." She sat with that for a moment. Through the kitchen window, the Calgary night was black and clear, a cold that felt like it had teeth, the kind of March night that reminded you that winter had not conceded anything, was merely waiting. "Mom," she stopped, started again. "He's still connected to his father. There are lawyers. The father wants him to recant his testimony." Sylvia was quiet for a long moment. "Then you need more information," Sylvia said, "before anything else happens, before Ember gets more attached." Her voice was very steady. "You need to know exactly what connected means, what risk looks like, whether it's a manageable risk or the kind that requires a complete stop," Rowan finished. "Yes." She closed her eyes. On the back of her eyelids, she saw Ember's hand flat on the car window. She saw Cade's face when Ember said, "I might need a consultant." She saw Daniel Mercer's tired eyes in the coffee shop in Bridgeland, and she heard him say, "I cannot start that with this sitting in the middle of it," and she understood now with a cold and specific clarity that she and Daniel were aligned on at least one thing. Nothing could be built on ground that hadn't been cleared. "I'm going to need to talk to his lawyers," she said, "or find my own. I need to understand the legal exposure. If his father's people are trying to build a case and Cade is the central witness, then your daughter's existence could become a variable," Sylvia said quietly. "In someone's strategy." The word variable in that context sat in Rowan's chest like a coal. "Yes," she said, "then you need a lawyer before you need anything else." Sylvia's voice was firm. "Monday morning. I'll come in. We'll find someone." "Mom, you don't have to. Ember is my granddaughter. I absolutely have to." She paused. "Go to sleep, Rowan. I know you won't, but try." She hung up, sat on the kitchen floor for another few minutes. Then she got up, because the floor was cold, and her back hurt, and she was 36 years old, and there was a limit to how long dramatic floor sitting was physically sustainable. She stood at the counter and looked at Ember's trap, the spring steel question, the tension distribution problem, the elaborate system of cardboard and rubber bands and diagrams that her daughter had been building for a month, trying to solve a problem that kept resisting solution. The trap that didn't quite work yet, but was always impressively complicated. Rowan picked up the green notebook. Read the trigger plate diagram. Read Cade's notes in the margin. Neat, angular handwriting she hadn't seen before today. Small, precise annotations about load bearing and release timing. The handwriting of someone who understood the mechanics and was trying to help the system work. She set it down. Her phone buzzed. Not Cade, not Sylvia. An unknown number, different from Daniel's. She stared at it, picked up. Silence on the other end for 1 second. Then a voice, older, unhurried, with the specific cadence of a man accustomed to controlling the pace of conversations. "Ms. Vale," the voice said, "I apologize for the hour. My name is Harold Mercer. I believe you know my son." The cold that moved through her was not like any cold she had felt before that night. "I know who you are," she said. Her voice came out level. She had no explanation for how. "Then you know I'm a man who values directness," Harold Mercer said. "So I'll be direct. I know about the child. I've known for 3 weeks, and I think it would benefit everyone if you and I had a conversation before my son's legal situation becomes significantly more complicated." Rowan's hand tightened on the phone. "Ms. Vale," Harold Mercer said, with the patience of a man who has said difficult things to many people and learned to wait through their silence. "Are you still there?" She was still there. She was standing in her kitchen at 9:30 on a Saturday night with her daughter asleep 3 miles away and a man in federal custody on the other end of her phone, and she was thinking with absolute crystalline clarity that the ground she had been standing on was not solid and had never been solid, and the only question that mattered now was whether she could find something solid before everything fell. "I'm here," she said. "Good," Harold Mercer said. And in his voice she heard the particular satisfaction of a man who has been waiting a long time for a conversation and has finally, at last, gotten the other party on the line. She did not hang up. That was the first decision, and it was made in the half-second between hearing Harold Mercer say, "Are you still there?" and understanding what kind of man would make this call at this hour, in this way, with that specific patience in his voice. A man who had calculated the moment, a man who knew that 9:30 on a Saturday night was when defenses were thinnest, when the day had already cost something, when the person on the other end was tired enough to be reactive instead of deliberate. She recognized the tactic because she had seen it in the ER, not from patients, but from the family members of patients, the ones who had something to gain from a particular outcome, and knew that an exhausted professional was more pliable than a rested one. She had learned to recognize it, and she had learned to respond to it the same way every time, by slowing down when the other party wanted speed. "Mr. Mercer," she said, "I'm going to stop you there." A pause. She heard the pause. He hadn't expected interruption. "Ms. Vale, I'm not going to have this conversation tonight," she said. "If you want to talk to me, you'll do it through my lawyer. I'll have contact information for you by Tuesday." Another pause. Longer. "I think you're misreading the nature of this call," he said, and the patience in his voice had taken on a slight edge, just barely detectable. "I'm not making threats. I'm extending an invitation." "I understand the distinction you're drawing," she said. "I don't accept it. Good night, Mr. Mercer." She hung up. She set the phone on the counter face down and stood very still with her hands flat on the surface on either side of it and breathed. In for 4, out for 4, the count she used in the ER when a situation was trying to take her pulse rate somewhere unhelpful. She did it 3 times. Then she picked up the phone and called Cade. He answered before the first ring finished. "Your father just called me," she said. The silence on his end had a quality she hadn't heard from him before. Not guilt, not the managed control she'd been watching him deploy for 2 weeks, but something rawer and colder, the silence of a man who has just heard the specific thing he most feared. "On your cell," he said. "Yes." "How did he get—" He stopped. She could hear him breathing. He has investigators. Private. I didn't know he had your number. He said he's known about Ember for 3 weeks. A sharp exhale. Rowan, I hung up on him. I told him to contact me through a lawyer. Her voice was steady in a way that was costing her considerably. But Cade, he knows her name. She heard Cade move, the sound of him standing, of something being set down hard. I'll call his lawyers tonight. I'll make clear that any contact with you or Ember goes through. You don't get to manage this, she said. Not unilaterally. Not anymore. She pressed her hand flat on the counter. We handle this together or we don't handle it at all. Do you understand what I'm saying? A silence. Then quietly, yes. I'm getting a lawyer Monday. I need you to give me every document, every letter, every piece of correspondence you have from his legal team. Everything. No more selective disclosure. You'll have it. And Cade, she paused. Is there anything else? Anything you haven't told me? Anything at all? The silence stretched long enough that her chest tightened. Then he said, Daniel has been in contact with my father's lawyers too. Not cooperating, refusing. But they've approached him. He should tell you himself, but I want you to know. Why didn't Daniel tell me that today? I don't know. I didn't know he'd contacted you at all until an hour ago. His voice was flat and tired, and she could hear in it the particular exhaustion of a man who has been holding a complicated structure together for a long time and has just watched it begin to come apart in multiple places simultaneously. I have made a significant number of errors in judgment. I understand that. I want to fix them, and I recognize I'm not in a position to tell you what that fixing should look like. She looked at Ember's notebook on the counter, at the trap diagram, at Cade's neat marginal notes. Go home, she said. Sleep if you can. Monday we start doing this differently. She hung up. She stood in her kitchen for a long time after. Then she went to bed and, contrary to every expectation, slept. Monday happened the way necessary things happen. Not easily, but with the forward motion of something that has been decided. Sylvia drove in from Red Deer and arrived at 7:15 with coffee and the name of a family lawyer she'd found through her own network, a woman named Patricia Osei, who had a reputation for being both precise and unsentimental, which were the two qualities Rowan needed most right now. Patricia Osei's office was on the 14th floor of a building downtown, and she met them at 9 a.m., in a room with large windows and a view of the Bow River that nobody was paying attention to. She was 52, with close-cut gray hair and reading glasses on a chain, and the particular economy of movement of someone who has been managing other people's crises for long enough that urgency has become her baseline rather than her exception. Rowan told her everything, all of it, beginning to end. The ER, the phone calls, the cafe, Daniel in Bridgeland, the conversation with Cade Saturday night, Harold Mercer's call. She told it in order, with the same clean details she used writing patient notes, and Patricia listened without interrupting, taking occasional notations on a legal pad in handwriting that was almost too small to read from across the table. When Rowan finished, Patricia said, The call from Harold Mercer is the central issue. I thought so. He's in federal custody, which means any attempt to contact a private individual about matters related to his case or his son's testimony carries significant legal weight. If his lawyers were behind that call, and they almost certainly were, we have grounds to file a motion that could complicate his appeal considerably. She looked at her notes. The question is what outcome you want. I want my daughter safe, Rowan said, and I want to understand the actual risk. Not the version Cade gave me, not the version Harold Mercer was positioning. The actual risk. The actual risk, Patricia said, is this. Harold Mercer's legal team is building a coercion defense. They want to establish that Cade's cooperation with federal investigators was coerced or otherwise compromised. If they can introduce new variables, a secret relationship, a child Cade didn't know about, emotional leverage, they create doubt about Cade's state of mind and motivation at the time of his cooperation. Your daughter's existence is not a legal threat to you, but she could be used as a narrative element in Cade's discrediting. Sylvia, sitting beside Rowan, made a sound that was not quite a word. How do we prevent that? Rowan said. We establish your complete independence from Cade's situation. We document that you had no knowledge of the federal investigation during your relationship, which appears to be true and which Cade's own testimony likely already supports. We also, Patricia paused, send a very clear message to Harold Mercer's legal team that you are represented and that any further contact will be treated as witness intimidation. Will that stop them? Patricia looked at her over her reading glasses. It will make them careful. Careful is what you want. On Wednesday morning, Rowan met Cade at a coffee shop near the law office. Patricia had suggested neutral ground for all exchanges until the legal framework was established, and he handed her a folder that was 2 inches thick. Every letter, every legal communication, every piece of correspondence from his father's team going back 8 months. He set it on the table and did not offer explanations or context, just, everything is here. If something is missing, tell me and I'll find it. She took the folder, looked at it, looked at him. He looked worse than he had Saturday. Not dramatically. He was still composed, still carrying himself with the particular discipline she'd come to recognize as his default. But there were shadows under his eyes and something in his face that had moved past the managed control into something more honest and more costly. Daniel called me, he said. He knows you and I are in contact. He said he'd like to reach out to you again, if you're willing. Tell him yes. Cade nodded. And the recantation, she said. Your father's team wants you to recant. Are you going to? No. No hesitation, no qualification. No. Even with all of this. Especially with all of this. He looked at the table. My father put 2 men in federal custody who are genuinely dangerous. What he was doing was genuinely harmful. I made the right decision 8 years ago, and I am not going to unmake it because he has found a new angle. He looked up. I should have told you all of this from the beginning, I know that. But the decision itself, the original decision, I would make it again. She believed him. She sat with the discomfort of believing him, and the separate discomfort of still being angry, and the further discomfort of understanding that both those things could be true simultaneously, which was the kind of emotional complexity she generally preferred to avoid, but was apparently not going to be able to this time. Patricia is filing a motion today, she said, about your father's call to me. Good. It may complicate his appeal. Good, he said again, the same flat word, and in it she heard 8 years of something she couldn't name precisely. Not vindictiveness, but the bone-deep tiredness of a man who has been paying a price for a long time and is done pretending the payment is invisible. She picked up the folder. I'll have Patricia go through this. There's a letter on top, he said, the most recent one, 2 weeks ago. He paused. It's the one that mentions you by first name. She looked at him. They knew about me before the call. Yes. I didn't know they knew. I found out Saturday after we talked. He held her gaze. I'm telling you now. That's all I can do. She opened the folder, found the letter, read the relevant paragraph, which was 3 sentences long, and contained her name and the phrase additional interested parties and a reference to the minor child that made her vision go briefly white at the edges with a cold, specific fury. She closed the folder. Okay, she said. Her voice was very level. Okay. Rowan. I'm not falling apart, she said. I'm angry. Those are different things, and I know the difference. She stood. I'll be in touch after Patricia reviews the file. She walked out of the coffee shop and into the March morning, and the cold hit her face, and she stood on the sidewalk and breathed it in, and the fury was still there, clean and cold and purposeful, and she let it be purposeful instead of destructive, which was the only option that led anywhere useful. She went to Patricia's office and handed over the folder and said, the letter on top, the one with her name and the phrase about the minor child. Start there. Patricia started there. 3 weeks later, Harold Mercer's legal team received a response from Patricia Osai's office that was 11 pages long and contained enough documentation of improper contact, potential witness intimidation, and procedural violations to significantly complicate any hearing they had been planning. Patricia had also, through a contact in the federal prosecutor's office, ensured that the relevant parties were aware of the Saturday night phone call and its implications. The call stopped. The letters stopped. What remained was a federal case that was still ongoing, a man in custody who still had lawyers, and a situation that was not resolved so much as it was, for now, contained. Patricia had been clear about this. Contained was the realistic outcome, not finished. Harold Mercer was not going to stop. But he was going to be careful, and careful meant slow, and slow meant Rowan had time. Time was what she'd asked for. Time was what she got. It was Daniel who called her on a Thursday evening in early April, the first real warmth of the year just beginning to soften the edges of the city, the snow on the north-facing slopes still holding, but the south-facing streets finally clear. He called at 6:30, which was a reasonable hour, and he said simply, "I'd like to start over, if that's possible." "What does starting over look like to you?" she asked. "Coffee, somewhere neutral, and I answer every question you have honestly, including the ones about what I know, what I've done, and what I want." A pause. "I'm not Cade. I handle things differently." She had gathered that. In the week since Bridgeland, Daniel had communicated with her twice by text, both times to pass on relevant information about their father's legal team without being asked, without framing, without spin, just the information, accurately conveyed. "Saturday," she said. "Same place." "I'll be there." She paused. "Daniel, does Ember know you exist?" Cade told her there was an uncle, last week. He said she asked approximately 14 follow-up questions. Rowan closed her eyes briefly. Of course she did. He said she wants to know if I also understand tension distribution. Despite everything, despite the weeks of legal documents and late nights, and the particular exhaustion of navigating a situation with too many variables and not enough certainty, Rowan laughed. A real one. The kind that came up from somewhere below the stress, from whatever part of her had been keeping an eye on Ember through all of it and finding consistently that Ember was fine. More than fine. Ember, who had been told about the legal complications in terms appropriate for a 7-year-old, "There are some grown-up problems that need to be sorted out, but you are safe, and none of it is your fault," had processed this information and responded by redoubling her work on the trap, which she had redesigned twice since the cafe meeting, and which now, Rowan was grudgingly impressed to note, actually worked. The trigger plate functioned. The tension distribution, addressed through the material switch Cade had suggested, held for more than 2 hours. The release mechanism, which Ember had redesigned entirely based on a YouTube video about mechanical advantage, deployed cleanly. She had demonstrated it for Rowan on a Tuesday night in the kitchen, and when the mechanism fired and the trap closed exactly as designed, Ember had looked up with an expression of such complete, undiluted satisfaction that Rowan had stood very still for a moment, aware that she was witnessing something. "It works," Ember said. "It works," Rowan agreed. "I want to show Cade." She had on a Sunday afternoon. Rowan had been present, all meetings still in neutral spaces, still with Rowan there, still operating within the framework she had established, and that Cade continued to accept without argument. They had met at a park near the river, and Ember had demonstrated the trap on a flat section of pavement, and Cade had crouched down to examine the trigger mechanism with genuine, focused attention, and he had said, "The spring steel was the right call, but look at this." He pointed to something in the hinge. "If you modify the angle here by about 15 degrees, you get a faster deployment." Ember had looked at the hinge, looked at him. "Show me." He had shown her. She had filed it away in the green notebook and said she'd test it next weekend, and then she'd asked him if he wanted to see the rest of the park. And they had walked ahead together with Ember pointing out various things of interest. A tree with an unusual root structure. A drain she believed could be repurposed as a component in a larger mechanism. A hill that had good running momentum. While Rowan walked 15 feet behind them and watched. She had watched the way Cade listened. She had watched the way he turned to face Ember when she was talking, the way he didn't check his phone, the way he matched her walking pace without appearing to try, the way his hands made the sketching gesture in the air when he was explaining something, and Ember's hands made the same gesture back, and neither of them noticed they were doing it. She had watched this, and she had felt, again, that specific feeling from the cafe, the space between grief and joy, the precise location where one thing ends and another begins. And this time she let herself stand in it for a moment, rather than pushing through it, because she was starting to understand that the space itself was where she needed to be, at least for now. Not on one side or the other, not resolved, not finished, just present in the complicated middle of a thing that was still becoming. Well, in the first week of April, Rowan called her mother on a Tuesday evening after Ember was asleep, sat at the kitchen table in the quiet, and said, "I think I'm going to be okay." Sylvia was quiet for a moment. "I know. I'm not saying everything is fixed. I know that too. I'm saying I think I'm going to be okay." Those are different things. They are, Sylvia agreed. The second one is better. Rowan looked at the kitchen, at the counter where the trap parts had been replaced by the finished mechanism, which Ember had set up as a permanent installation beside the dish that held the keys. At the refrigerator with its drawings. At the table where Cade had sat and told her the truth, finally, and where she had told him to leave, and where she had sat afterward on the floor because the floor was solid. Do you trust him? Sylvia asked. Rowan thought about it. I trust him more than I did a month ago. I don't trust him completely. I think complete trust is something that gets built over time, and I think we're at the beginning of that time. She paused. I trust that he loves her. I'm certain of that. That's something. It's a lot, actually. Sylvia hummed. And you? Do you? She stopped. That's a different question. It is, Rowan said. You don't have to answer it tonight. I know. She looked at the table. I don't have an answer for it tonight. Okay. A pause, warm and unhurried. But you're going to be okay. I'm going to be okay. The Saturday in mid-April, when everything finally felt, if not resolved, then at least settled into its true shape, began with Ember at the kitchen counter drawing a new mechanism in the green notebook and Rowan making coffee, and the particular light of an actual spring morning coming through the window for the first time in months. Not the flat gray light of winter or the pale, uncertain light of early March, but real light, the kind with warmth in it. They were meeting Cade and Daniel at the Riverside Park at 11. Daniel and Ember had met once already, briefly, at the coffee shop on a Saturday morning, and Ember had assessed him with the same tilted head evaluation she'd used on Cade, had asked him 3 questions and listened to his answers, and had concluded, "You tell the truth faster than he does." Daniel had looked startled and then said, "Yes, that's accurate." "Good," Ember had said. "I like that." Today was the first meeting where it was all 4 of them together, Rowan and Ember and Cade and Daniel. And Rowan had lain awake for part of the previous night processing the specifics of what that would look like, and had eventually concluded that what it would look like was unpredictable, which was not the same as dangerous, and that unpredictable things could be good. She handed Ember her coat at 10:30, and Ember put it on with the distracted compliance of someone whose mind was elsewhere, still turning a page in the notebook, still thinking through a problem. Rowan watched her and felt the familiar weight of love that was the constant background note of her life. The specific love that parenthood produced, the kind that was too large to look at directly most of the time, and so you looked slightly to the side of it and let it be present without examining it too closely. "Mom," Ember said. "Yeah. Is it going to be weird today, with both of them?" Rowan thought about it honestly. "Maybe a little, at first. And then? And then probably not." She helped Ember with the zipper, which stuck the way it always stuck, in exactly the same spot every time. "You handled every weird thing so far." "I know." Ember said this matter-of-factly, without arrogance. "I'm good at weird things." "You are." Ember looked up at her, those dark eyes, clear and direct, the eyes that had been asking questions since she was old enough to form them. "Are you going to be okay today, Mom?" "Not general okay. Specifically today." Rowan looked at her daughter. 8 months ago, before a bitter March morning when an ambulance had brought a particular patient through the ER doors, Rowan's life had been built on the architecture of doing everything alone. She had built it well. She had built it strong and clean and functional, and she had been proud of it in the way you are proud of something you built under difficult conditions with the materials available, knowing it was not quite the structure you would have chosen if you'd had more. She was not alone today. She was not finished being angry, not finished being cautious, not finished with the legal complexity or the ongoing management of a situation that was contained but not closed. She was not in love, exactly, or she was not letting herself examine whether she was, which was a different kind of not. She was not at the end of anything. She was simply in the middle of something real, something with weight and texture and risk, something that required her to stay awake and stay honest and stay present in a way that her carefully maintained solitude never had. The weight of doing everything alone had not been replaced by the absence of weight. It had been replaced by a different weight, the weight of other people, of their reality and their complexity and their presence, which was heavier in some ways and lighter in others, and which she was still learning to carry. "Yeah," she told Ember. "Specifically today, I'm going to be okay. Ember zipped up her own coat the rest of the way, picked up the green notebook, and headed for the door with the forward momentum of someone who has decided and has no patience for delay. "Then let's go," she said. "I want to show Daniel the hinge modification." The park was bright and cold, and the river moved past it with the particular energy of spring melt, faster and higher than it had been in winter, brown with sediment and full of its own forward motion. The trees along the bank were beginning to show the first suggestions of green, the buds not yet open but present, the possibility of them unmistakable. Cade was there when they arrived, standing near the path that ran along the water, his coat collar turned up, watching the river. He turned when he heard them and looked at Ember first. It was always Ember first. Rowan had noticed this, the way his eyes went to his daughter before they went anywhere else, with a look that was still learning to contain itself. And then at Rowan, briefly and carefully, the look of a man who knows the permission he is operating under and does not take it for granted. Daniel was a few feet away, sitting on a bench looking at his phone, and he stood when Ember approached, and the first thing Ember said was, "Did you look up the hinge modification like I asked?" Daniel put his phone away. "I did. I have thoughts." "Good. Let's walk." She pointed at the river path and looked back at Rowan. "Coming?" Rowan looked at Cade. He looked at her. "Yeah," she said. "We're coming." They walked in a loose arrangement that settled naturally, without planning. Ember and Daniel ahead, notebook open, already deep in the mechanics discussion, their voices carrying back in fragments. Rowan and Cade behind, far enough apart to be clearly separate but close enough that their footsteps were part of the same rhythm on the path. They didn't talk immediately. The river moved beside them, and the spring light was on the water, and the park was full of other people doing ordinary Saturday things. A man with a dog, two joggers, a grandmother with a stroller, the everyday texture of a city that didn't know or care about the specific weight of this specific walk. After a while, Cade said, "Thank you." She didn't ask for what. She knew what he meant. The accumulated what, the full scope of it. She said, "Don't thank me. Just keep doing it right." "I intend to." "I know." She paused. "That's why we're here." Ahead of them, Ember said something that made Daniel laugh. A full, surprised laugh. The laugh of someone caught off guard by a child who is funnier than expected. And Cade heard it, and Rowan watched his face do the thing it did. The not-quite smile that was the building material of something larger. And she felt her own face doing the same thing, and was not sure anymore whether she had borrowed it from him or Ember had given it to both of them. Some things, she thought, you couldn't trace to their origin. Some things just existed in the space between people, built from a combination of materials that nobody had owned individually. Ember stopped on the path and pointed at something near the water, a root system, or a rock formation, or some configuration of the natural world that had triggered an engineering thought, and began explaining it to Daniel with her hands moving in the air, the fast, precise sketching of a child for whom ideas were physical, were things you had to gesture at to make real. Cade stopped walking. Rowan stopped beside him. They stood on the path and watched Ember's hands move and the river move, and Daniel lean in to look at whatever she was pointing at. And the light on the water was the particular April light that hadn't been available for months, that made the city look like a different place. And the trees were beginning, and the river was full, and the path ahead of them was long and not uncomplicated and not guaranteed. Rowan breathed in, breathed out. She was a woman who had built everything alone, from the materials available, under difficult conditions. She had built it strong, and now the structure was changing shape, not collapsing, not being replaced, but expanding into something larger and less certain and more inhabited, something that required a different kind of architecture entirely, one she was still learning. She had not forgiven completely. She had not arrived at some clean, uncomplicated shore. She was still carrying things. The 8 years, the omissions, the Saturday night phone call from a man in federal custody, the ongoing careful navigation of a situation that was contained but alive. She was carrying all of it, and she was still moving, which was not the same as being healed, but was not nothing either. It was in fact the only true thing she knew how to do. Keep moving, keep her eyes open, keep her hands at work. Some families, she thought, are born whole. Others come together in pieces, imperfect and hard-won, built from the materials of old mistakes and new choices, assembled over time by people who are trying, imperfectly, inconsistently, with the full weight of who they have been, to be better than they were. She did not know what Cade Mercer would become over the next year, or 5 years, or 20. She did not know how the legal situation would resolve, or what Harold Mercer's team would try next, or what it would cost to navigate it. She did not know what she felt precisely, standing beside this man on a river path in April, watching their daughter draw blueprints in the air, whether it was love or its precursor or something more complicated than either. She knew that Ember had pressed her hand against the car window. She knew that Ember's trap worked. She knew that her daughter had asked 8 questions in a green notebook and had gotten honest answers and had decided, with the particular pragmatic courage of a child who has been doing hard thinking for a long time, to open a door. And she knew that standing here, on this path, in this light, watching that door open, she was not alone in carrying it. That was enough. For today, it was enough. The river moved past them in its indifferent, continuous way, carrying whatever the thaw had released from the mountains. The long winter's worth of accumulation, all of it moving now, all of it on its way to somewhere else. And ahead on the path, Ember turned around and called back to them with the impatience of someone whose mind is always 3 steps ahead of the people around her. "Are you coming or not?" Rowan looked at Cade. Cade looked at Rowan. "Coming," Rowan called back. And they walked forward into the morning together, not healed, not finished, not certain of anything except the next step, which was the only certainty that had ever actually been available, and which, on this particular April day, in this particular light, was more than enough. He didn't knock. He never knocked. Dorian Vale walked into the hospital records office at 11:47 p.m., straightened his cufflinks, and told the clerk on duty to delete a woman's file. Not her name, not her address. Everything. Prenatal records, blood type, the birth certificate of a child who didn't yet know his father was one of the most dangerous men alive. The clerk hesitated for exactly 4 seconds. Then Dorian placed a photograph on the desk. The clerk's daughter, walking to school, eating lunch, laughing with her friends. "She has such a happy life," Dorian said. Every record was gone by midnight. 7 years later, a boy named Nolan Rowan was helping his mother stack peaches at a farmer's market outside Seattle, completely unaware that the man who erased his entire existence from official history was still alive, still powerful, and still absolutely certain that love, in any form, was the most